there's the path of like being very specific and there's the path of being very viral and generic. I am really specific on solopreneurship. Like we talk about the same stuff every single day, all the time, right? So as you grow your audience, the audience that you're growing is specific. My first product was $50. If they spend $50, can you deliver $50,000 of value and like set the stage for a deep future relationship for the next decade, right? You have that option. A few years later, you could do a core product as your audience grows and maintains specificity, right? Then if you keep growing like me, get to a million followers, 1.5 million across a few platforms, you can drop your high ticket offer like I did with the Creator MBA because I've been beating the same drum for so long. The reverse of that is when you don't have a specific audience, when your audience is relatively generic, when you're talking about things like just general productivity, for example, right? Productivity in and of itself is a thing, but there are so many different types of productivity. It can get so much more niche than that. And so what happens is you might have a harder time as your audience grows. We don't think about that when we're creating our content, when we're building our brands. We're trying to be entertaining and get the most likes. It's like, no, be that guy. Be the guy who solves a very specific problem that's painful for a very specific company or person.
All right. Well, my guest today is the one and only Justin Welsh. Justin left his startup executive role in 2019 after suffering from burnout. Since then, he's made $8 million by helping creators and entrepreneurs become successful solopreneurs. And I've taken his course, Creator MBA, and honestly, it's one of the highest insight per minute courses that I've ever taken. So welcome, Justin.
Thanks, man. Peter, I appreciate you having me and thanks for the kind words and thanks for being a customer.
All right. So let's go back to, I think 2018, 2019. You were the VP of sales at a fast growing startup. You had 150 reports or something like that. So by all means, it's kind of like society's traditional definition of success, right? But like, when did you realize that you actually needed a change from that career path?
Yeah. Becoming like a VP of sales was sort of the upper echelon of what I wanted to reach in my career. And when I was a salesperson and then a manager and then a director, like that was the thing. That's what I wanted to be. And when I got there, I loved it. And, grew the team from just one sales guy to 150 salespeople. I had maybe 6 to 8 direct reports, but the team was big and the targets were big. And back in 2015 to 2019, when that was my life, it was the growth at all costs phase in startups. And so, every target got bigger, faster, the stakes got higher and it got more nerve wracking, right? Like I hit, I think 16 quarters in a row of my target, even though they were massively big. And people think that burnout comes from working really hard or working too hard or working too long. And I don't actually think that's why burnout happens. I can work hard for a long period of time, as can a lot of people. I think burnout starts to happen when you lose control. And so I often kind of bring up this example where if you've played Tetris before, as the levels get harder and harder, the pieces start falling faster and faster, and you have to make moves much faster. And when you mess up a move, it compounds very quickly because the pieces just start stacking on top of one another really fast. And that is what it's like when you start to feel out of control at a company or in your role. When like you make a mistake and one mistake becomes 2, becomes 4, becomes 16, becomes 190, like it just multiplies, right? And it multiplies fast. And so I knew that I needed a break because I coped with burnout in the same way that a lot of people do, which is I ate too much. I drank too much. I didn't exercise very much. I didn't get much sleep. I wasn't a great husband. I wasn't paying attention to my family. And that all sort of culminated in this panic attack that I had in December of 2018, which was like, if you've never had one, it sounds silly, like a panic attack, but it was like a pretty meaningful day of my life where I didn't really know what was happening. I thought I was dying. And that was the day that I knew that I needed to make a change. And I had a conversation with my bosses the following Monday and they were super receptive and understanding. And I ended up staying for another 8 months and getting myself back into mental and physical shape.
Got it. And it's kind of like a big leap to make, right? Because you've kind of made it as VP of sales. And for you to tell your boss that actually, I don't want to become SVP or CEO. I just want to make a change. But I guess when you actually, go to the hospital or something, it's kind of like it's kind of like a wake up call.
Yeah, it was interesting. Like I had aspirations of becoming a chief revenue officer. It actually happened. I went back to the company a year later. I was rehired to be the chief revenue officer. So I was able to sort of check that box in my career, which was really nice. And I helped them navigate growing the company through COVID. But I got lucky in a weird way. And the way that I got lucky was I was forced. Like a lot of people sit around and they think about like, should I, grow my side hustle? Should I become an entrepreneur? Should I leave my job? Like I didn't have a choice. I backed myself into a corner physically and mentally. And the only choice I had was to take a break. And in a weird way, that was like a very lucky thing to happen to me because it's like, that was the only option I had. So I had to take it and it made it a lot easier.
Got it. So I think, tech industry goes through these ups and downs. And I think many tech people are feeling burnt out right now. Either they're like, they lost their job already, or you know how this stuff goes. Like you could be doing well at your company and then they want to do cost cutting and then you get laid off. But, I think a lot of people still have mortgages to pay. They live in the Bay Area. What's your advice for folks who are thinking about doing this or trying to take back control a little bit?
Yeah, it's a phased approach, right? I think there's a lot of I think people talk about media propaganda. I think everything's propaganda. So like if you go out and you read, internet gurus propaganda, it's all about like working 4 hours a day on the beach or like whatever it might be, right? And like, sure, can you eventually reach that if you put in many years? Maybe. But like the truth and the reality and the authentic way to sort of make it and to gradually gain back some control is just what I said. It's gradual. And so the first thing that you can do is figure out just like, how might you get a little bit of attention online? And maybe it's not even online, right? Maybe it's local. Maybe online is not the only game. It's the biggest game. And so like, how might you get a little bit of attention? And if you can find 15 extra minutes every day to think about attention and to put yourself out there and to share the knowledge and the skills that you've accumulated over the course of your career or your hobbies or things that you like doing in your free time, that's a great start, right? Figure out like, what does it mean to market oneself? Because so many people are smart. They have awesome business ideas. They've got great products. They've got great services, but they can't communicate. And in the end, communicating your value is the thing that matters the most. So I would practice that. I would practice that for a long time until you get really good at it. And once you get good at communicating your value and sharing your expertise and your knowledge, that is when you can start, making a little bit of extra money, doing a little coaching, maybe building a product, maybe you have a micro SaaS consulting business. And as you get traction, you're going to start growing over time. And once you have reached a certain threshold, maybe you're 60 to 70% of your take home earnings, getting 40 hours a week back, you're likely to continue to grow. And so think of it as a phased, gradual approach over many years. And just because you see someone who did it faster doesn't mean that's the right way to do it.
Yeah, in some ways, it's almost good to, do a couple of years while having your main job. Because, if you just quit without having the income, you're going to put a ton of pressure on yourself. And it's going to be pretty stressful, right? So
that's right. That's right. People see that I went on social media about 8 months before I quit, right? I had this panic attack and then I started writing online. Because I was like, okay, if I'm going to quit my job, I have to got to do something, right? I didn't know what else to do other than maybe I would go talk about my expertise. But I had timing on my side. I did it in 2018, back before the platform that I chose, LinkedIn, was even a popular place to write, right? So I got luck, timing. Don't follow my path and hope that you have the same luck and timing that I do. Follow a more gradual phased approach and don't attempt to be an outlier. Try and be the person that thinks in the long game and takes their time and has patience.
Another thing that I think you're really good at is you create your systems and stuff. And one of your systems is how to use your time more effectively, which is, I think, very relevant for people who want to start side hustles, right? So can you talk about the steps that you go through? Think about where you spend your time.
Yeah. I mean, it's not too complicated. Effectively, the way that I think about spending time is you should probably, like anything around the Pareto principle, is you should probably be spending your time doing the 20% of things that maximize 80% of your intended outcome. And that outcome may not be making money. It might be growing a social media audience. It might be, something else, spending more time on your hobbies. But what I generally do is I start by picking an intended outcome, right? So you might say my intended outcome is to grow my business revenue, right? And so once you know that you want to grow your business revenue, all you do is you take a look at your week. And this is what I do, something I do generally quarterly, is I'll just lay out my week and I'll say, all right, inside of any given week, what are every task that I do during the week, right? So if I think about tasks that I do, there's I write my newsletter. I think of ideas. I create content. I create my templates. I edit the newsletter. I send it. I do podcasts. I help people do login issues. I set up tracking on my social media stuff. I book sponsors. I find affiliates. Like there's a million little tasks, right? That fall, to me to accomplish, or at least they used to. And so once you have all those tasks out, you just look and say, all right, like how much time do I spend on these tasks, right? Do I spend an hour, 2 hours, 30 minutes, so on and so forth? And then you basically say, all right, on a scale of whatever, 1 to 5, 1 to 10, you pick the scale. Like, how do these tasks align with the intended impact that I'm trying to have? Like, I might say like scheduling a podcast interview back and forth on email. If you tie that to generating revenue for my business, it's a 1 out of 10, right? Sending making sure that my newsletter is high quality, it's probably a 9 out of 10. So like you just kind of assign value to each of these tasks. And what you're left with is an assigned value from 1 to 10 or 1 to 5 or however you want to rank it. And then you've got an hourly amount of time that you spend each week. And then you have ratios. You simply divide those into one another and each thing gets a number, right? And what you're trying to do is say, all right, I got 60 tasks. If I have 60 tasks I'm going to do, the top 20% are the top 12, right? So list those out in order from 1 to 60. So what are the top 12? That's probably where you should spend your time. Or if you want to say it's 50, it's the top 10, right? That's where you should spend your time. Everything else should have one of 3 sort of things tethered to it. It should either be simplified or eliminated. First, go through and eliminate the bottom stuff, right? Like what's the stuff that is not important at all? Eliminate it, get rid of it. After that, it's like, okay, what are some things that are really complex that could be simplified? And if you can simplify those, will they take up significantly less time and therefore have a better ratio number? Next up, can you automate something with a tool, AI, automated tools, Zapier, whatever it might be? And then can you delegate things? And so I do this quarterly and I'm left with the things that I should do, the things that I can automate, delegate, eliminate, and simplify. And that keeps me on target for the things I should be working on.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think like additional wrinkle is like some of these things could be like very high value for generating revenue, but like you just hate doing it. Like,
sure.
like, I don't know, like trying to find sponsors or like, teach a bunch of live courses on the weekends. So then
totally.
You might want to try to dedicate or automate some of that still, right? It's like
certainly. Yeah. And like when I go through the process, it's like any process, there's nuance to the process. So like if you look at your top 10, you're like, man, I hate doing one of these things. Cool. It's not a steadfast rule, right? You don't have to be like, oh, unfortunately I have to do these 10 things. Like, okay, you hate it. You're going to do 9 out of the top 10 things and you're going to outsource that one thing, or you're going to automate that one thing, or God forbid, you're going to eliminate it. So it's not steadfast, but it helps you get a sense of where you should be spending your time.
Got it. Okay. So now let's talk about finding your niche and like crafting your unique value prop. By the way, that's like probably my favorite part of your course. Yeah. I think it's probably the most important part. So people keep talking about, gotta find a niche. How can people figure out, what problem other people are willing to pay them for? Like, how do you even start thinking about this? Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of ways, right? So like, I'm certainly not the authority on telling people how to find their niche, although I think I'm pretty good at it. So I'll share 4 ways that you can think through it. And again, it's not an exhaustive list. I'm sure someone listening will say, oh, I have a 5th or a 6th way. And that's awesome. Again, I'm not the authority, but one way is just pretty simple. It's your practical experience and it's your credibility. So what have you done at work? Right? Like, for example, I was a VP of sales and a sales leader for, I think 16 years, right? So that was pretty easy. So the first thing that I did when I quit my job was I didn't become the creator that I am today. I built a consulting business helping healthcare startups grow, because that's what I'd done for 16 years. So it was like easy transition, right? So one way is practical experience and credibility. Another one is just what I might call like a learned obsession. It's that thing that you don't do for a living, but you're completely obsessed with. So I pivoted over time. I went from helping healthcare startups grow to becoming a creator and maybe what you might call like digital marketing, for lack of a better description, right? And solopreneurship and things like that. I was obsessed with that. I never did it as a career up until me doing it now. But like I was reading every book, I was listening to every podcast, I was reading every blog post I could find. I was tinkering with tools. I was doing marketing on the side, creating content, lead magnets, webinars, everything, right? Because I was super obsessed with that. And that was an obsession that I just learned. And since I learned it over time, I became an expert without having, traditional experience or having it in my title at work or anything like that. So that's another thing that you can do. And a lot of times people are obsessed with something that's completely unrelated to their job. The third thing that you can look at is just, what do people come to you for advice for? Like, we all have family and friends that come and they say, oh, Peter's really good at X, or man, Justin, I was thinking about you because I have this one problem and I know like you're the guy who can solve this thing. And maybe you're good at 3 things, right? But it's like, keep your eyes and ears open for those things. We're in such a fast paced world. We're moving so quickly. We're not paying attention to much. We're consuming and creating. We often don't stop and like pause and be cognizant of the things that people are coming to us for help for. And those can be really awesome things to build a small side hustle on. And last is just problems you've solved for yourself. So like right now I have a problem in my business and I'm actively solving it. And as I solve that problem, I'm like, this is a cool product. This is a cool service. Like, if I'm having this problem, how many other creators are having this problem and would pay a lot of money to solve it? And so as I'm thinking about that as a product and service because I'm fixing a problem that I have myself. So those are like 4 ways that I might approach solving a problem.
Got it. And how do you, because like it's just kind of like building a product and bringing it to the market, right? Like, how do you validate this with real customers as soon as possible, as opposed to try to build something and then realize people don't want this? I guess it's kind of an obvious answer, but like, how do you go about it?
It's obvious to me, and maybe you, but that doesn't mean it's obvious to everyone. 5 years ago, I would have said, I have no idea, right? But to me, my inclination is to actually help them on your own, one-on-one, right? So it's like, identify 5 to 10 people who have those problems, have those aspirations, and want to work with you, right? And are they willing to put some skin in the game? And the amount doesn't matter. It's just, are they willing to spend money and time to solve the problem that you solve them, to reach the aspirational stage that they want to reach? And if you can do that, what you do is you validate that A, they'll spend the money, B, they'll spend the time, C, they'll show up and they'll do the work. And then D, you'll help them reach the intended outcome that you told them that you would help them reach. If you can do those 4 things, then you have at least a viable framework of a business, right? If nobody's willing to spend money and nobody's willing to spend time, then you have an idea, but you don't have a business, right? And so once you do that, what I would do is I would try and wrap that into a process, because I would imagine that if you have 5 guys and gals, there are going to be commonalities amongst all of them. And as you help them work through this problem or process, you will see all those commonalities. Those commonalities become a framework, right? So that as you bring more people in, you're like, I know the 5 things we got to nail in order to let them reach their outcome, to overcome their pain points. And then you turn that into a process as a service business where you can continue to work one-on-one with people. Once you've validated that there is more interest in the market and that your solution actually works, productize it. Raise your rates on your service side, lower the rates on the product side. For those people who don't want to spend a lot of money to do work one-on-one with you, let them work through a self-paced product. Those people who want hand-holding and want to spend time with you one-on-one, they've got the service business. This is exactly how I started my business.
Yeah, it does seem like a pretty surefire path. It's just like, when I think services business is like a lot more meetings and one-on-ones, but I think you just have to do it.
Yeah.
It's like building a product. You just got to talk to customers one-on-one and figure out what they want. Yeah.
It's like saying, I really want to build a product, but talking with customers sounds like a lot of time. Like it is.
Yeah.
But it's important, right? So like, I think you hear a lot about these startup founders who want to build something. I'm just going to make up an example, right? Like they want to build something in like supply chain, right? And they go and they spend like 100 hours on the Amazon distribution centers or in the supply chain place where they're doing like, manual labor to try and understand the pain. Like you got to live it before you can solve it.
Yeah. I think there was a step in your process that you skipped. I just want to bring it back, which is create a movement and find an enemy or someone to fight. Maybe you can give some examples of that from you or from your friends like Dan or other folks. Yeah,
totally. So that's more on the marketing side, right? So like, I don't think you need that to validate a business necessarily, but if you want to go out and you want to grow that business, you have to market. And so marketing is a lot like politics. And so I'll give you kind of an example. If you look at American politics, and I'm not going to go down a political rabbit hole or either party, I don't care about any of that stuff. Like just pick either party, right? Very rarely do they tell you all the good things that they do. Instead, most of the focus is on the bad things that the other party or candidate or person does, right? It's they're creating an enemy. And if you think about some marketing talk, like there's a famous quote, and I'll probably mess it up, which is like, you want to help people throw rocks at their enemies. I think it was Blair Warren who said that. And he's like kind of an old school marketer. And throwing rocks at your enemies is like, you want to pick a target. It doesn't have to be a person. It could be a mantra. It could be a movement. It could be an ideology that you are 100% against, right? And so for example, in your example, like you're against the idea of the traditional career path. Like to become a better engineer, you do not need to lead people. You do not need to grow teams. You want to be a better engineer, build better products, right? Build a career building the best product possible. So the reverse of that is your enemy, right? And once you have an enemy, you can build a movement because movements are built by defeating another enemy. So for example, I'll give you an example from my business. I talk about solopreneurship, right? Is solopreneurship right for everybody? It isn't. I'm very, very candid about that. I'm very clear about that. But I also won't tell someone they shouldn't try. I'm not a babysitter, right? I think adults should do whatever they want to do. My enemy is the traditional career and life path where you work for a company until they don't need you anymore and you get fired, and you do that for 60 years, hoping you can save enough for retirement. And we know from the average American, they can't. That sounds like a shitty life to me, right? So like, that's the enemy. And I throw rocks at that enemy all the time. And by throwing rocks at that enemy, I am building a movement. And the movement is that over here, we've got a group of solopreneurs who are taking control of their life, taking control of their time, and taking control of their freedom, right? A guy like Dan Go, a buddy of mine, the stereotype, and that stereotype is getting broken much faster by a lot more people of like, as an entrepreneur, you shouldn't be so busy that you're out of shape, right? You should be in the best shape of your life. Like the way that you treat your body should translate into how you treat your business and your family and the type of person that you are. Whether that's true or not, right? That is the movement that guys like Dan Go, a buddy of mine, is building. And by the way, I don't want to speak for Dan. That might not be exactly his movement, but that's sort of how I see it. And his enemy is, the entrepreneur who's letting themselves go, who's not keeping themselves in shape, who, says they'll do anything for their family, but they're not getting in shape for their family. That's his enemy, right? And so I think by having these two sort of juxtaposing things, the enemy and the movement, you can market a lot more effectively. And that's part of what marketing is.
Yeah, it does. I'm not going to talk about either party, but with the politics stuff, like one of my big frustrations is like they just keep talking shit about each other. They don't actually talk about what they're going to do for the country if they get elected.
Tell me what you'll do for me. That's right. Tell me what you do for me. But that doesn't sell, man. Unfortunately, by the way.
Yeah,
I wish it did.
That's crazy. That's crazy. Okay. So after you've crafted a really good, unique value proposition and when you talk to a bunch of customers, you validate it, people maybe pay you some money for it. You have this really simple funnel to actually get attention and to, get people to actually like build relationships and actually spend on your product. Maybe we can talk about it just at a really high level first.
Yeah, sure. I keep it simple because I think most marketing is overcomplicated. Not all marketing, by the way. I'm not trying to paint with a broad brush. There are certainly times and situations that call for complex marketing. But for the most part, there's the old school marketing funnel, right? I think it's awareness, idea. I can't even remember. Awareness, something, decision, action, right? I can't even remember because I don't really follow that one. I follow my own. So mine's a little bit different, right? It's get discovered, build trust, deepen relationships, and monetize. Very simple. So I'll kind of talk about it from a high level, right? So the top of the funnel is just called getting discovered. And so getting discovered simply means getting your name, your face, your brand, what you do, who you help, your knowledge in front of as many people as possible, right? As many people as possible, because you want people to resonate with your message. You want them to have an opportunity to hook on to your movement, to join you in throwing rocks at the enemy, to share it with their friends who say, hey, Jim, this sounds a lot like what you were telling me about, man. You should follow this guy, right? Getting discovered is huge. And that is all organic social. So organic social to me is all about getting discovered. And so that's why I'm very active on platforms like LinkedIn, like X, like Instagram, like Threads. I just try and get top of funnel discovery all the time. My goal is like hundreds of millions of impressions every single year. Getting discovered in and of itself is not enough, right? You have to, it's the eyeing, the AIDA's interest, right? But to me, less about interest, it's more about trust. So after getting discovered, I want to build trust. And I don't mean trust like, you'd leave me at home to babysit your kids or watch your house or anything like that. That's not the kind of trust that I'm talking about. The kind of trust that I'm talking about is like, I trust this person is really good at what they do. I trust this person is not just lip service, that they're actually an expert in the things they say they're an expert in. And the easiest way, in my opinion, today to show trust or to build trust is long form content. And so long form content can be written content, a newsletter, a blog, a lengthy article. It can be video, right? A robust YouTube video that takes someone from point A to point B in 25, 30 minutes. Like these are a podcast, right? Where you're breaking down complex topics and making them really simple. These are all opportunities to build trust. If you can get discovered and build trust, you're in a pretty good position to take the people who want the thing that you have, trust you're the right person, and make some money at a business, right? Mm-hmm. If you sell something very expensive, there's probably another step. The next step would be deepening the relationship. And that's why I think a lot of like enterprise level companies, a lot of high ticket sellers with really expensive stuff benefit greatly from events, communities, things where like people are getting access to them in real time and they're deepening that tie. They're strengthening that bond. They're really going deep on this relationship because we buy from people we know and like. So if you sell something that's $1,000, you got to deepen that relationship. And by the way, 1,000 is an arbitrary number. That might be inexpensive to a company and expensive to an individual person, but hopefully you get the point, right? Whereas if you sell something low ticket, $50, you might not need to deepen that relationship. After building trust, you might be ready to present your offer. You might say, hey, you've read all my stuff on LinkedIn. You've consumed all my newsletters and articles. You've checked out all my long form videos. Are you ready to work with someone to solve your problem? This thing's $50 or $99. Like, they might be ready to pull the trigger right then. So it's discovery, trust, relationship, monetization.
Got it. And what are some ways that you've kind of optimized this funnel that had kind of like a step function change in your business? Or is it just a matter of showing up every day and like doing the work?
Yeah. It's mostly the latter, right? But there are certainly some ways that I've gotten better at it. So I'll give you an example of how I've sort of fine tuned it, for lack of a better description. So let's start with the top, getting discovered. Well, getting discovered is a function of the value and quality of the piece of content that you create. So I've created probably 5,000 pieces of unique content over the last 5 years, and there's new AI tools out there. So what's the first thing that I want to do? I want AI to analyze the thousands of things that I've created and tell me, what is it about the top 50 that are similar, right? Yeah. What should I be trying to do to maximize getting discovered? So often what I think is, if you want to improve impressions, it's the opening, the hook, right? The opening and the hook kind of drive impressions. If you want to drive engagement, it's the body, it's the call to conversation. Those things drive comments, reshares, like the information. How good is it, right? Outside of the hook, like after the hook, did you deliver, right? That stuff drives the engagement, drives the comments, drives the retweets and the reshares. So like I'll look for commonalities amongst those things. And what I'm trying to craft, Peter, is like the perfect post. What does the perfect post look like that drives both impressions and engagement, right? And then I'll look at a ratio of impressions to clicks to my website. So like what percentage of people that saw this thing clicked through and went to the article that I recommended? And when I get these ratios, I can see, okay, just because something had 1 million hits and drove 1,000 people to my website, that's good. But what about something that only had 100,000 hits that drove 1,000 people to my website? That's a better call to action. I got a larger percentage of people to my site. And so I'll look at the commonalities in those things. I'll have AI break those down, say, what was it about this call to action that you think drove a bunch of people to my website? Again, I'm trying to have the perfect post. Mm-hmm. So once you've got the perfect post down, it's like, okay, I know the hook's good. I know the body's good. I know the call to conversation's good. I know the link to my website's going to work. Cool. We're getting them to the point where I'm starting to build trust. So I'm sending them to some article on my website. Certain articles work better than others. So the same ratio. How many people read an article versus make a purchase? If someone reads an article and 10% of them make a purchase on this article, or they read this other article and 2% of people make the purchase, the first article is 5 times more valuable, right? So how do I create more articles like that? So now I've got the perfect post, hook, body, call to conversation, link to my website, the right article. This is a well-optimized funnel where I know when I stitch these things together, and I hit post, it's going to lead to a lot of revenue. Those are the small and nuanced things that I do to make sure that the business is growing.
And you have to be like somewhat analytical with this stuff, right? So like, how do you like one struggle I have is like, my newsletter is on one platform, social stuff is on like these social platforms. Like I have to freaking like make a manual spreadsheet of this funnel and try to figure it out myself.
Yeah.
Do you have any like tools or something that you use, or just use spreadsheets?
Yeah. I mean, for the most part, man, like, I use publishing tools like most people. I use Tablio, I use Tweet Hunter, and they have built-in analytics, right? So I can export that stuff very quickly. I've got website analytics from Fathom Analytics, like that stuff, again, exported very quickly. So generally what I'd be, and then I've got, purchase history from Kajabi. So like I export those three things. I put them into one spreadsheet. I upload them to something like Claude or ChatGPT, and I'm like, give me a breakdown. Help me understand, like, what are the posts? What are the articles? Like, well, what is it that works? That used to be all manual, but today there's no need with all the new tools.
Yeah, the AI is really good at doing this stuff, like summarizing a bunch of information and like getting you to takeaways. That's probably what it's best at. So
yeah. So many people are like leveraging AI to like write comments and like write posts and write newsletters. And it's like, dude, there's such a better way to use it right now. It's like, keep your creativity, let it manage the data.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this has been awesome so far. let's talk about one more topic.
Sure.
If you don't mind. Yeah, sure. So I think this is kind of an eye opener for me, like you have this saying about creating stacked offers, and there's kind of two paths that you talk about. One is like, just like growing your audience as big as possible. Another path is much more specific and much more strategic. And, as someone who has like posted these memes that have got like 1,000,000+ views, but like so nothing, like I'm very cognizant of this. So maybe talk about these two paths and like why you recommend this other path.
Yeah. There's the path of like being very specific, and there's the path of being very viral and generic. And so, by the way, no path is wrong. It's just how can you harness the power of each path? Mm-hmm. So I'll give you an example. And by the way, just because I say this person is in this path, like doesn't necessarily mean that they are. I am really specific on solopreneurship. Dan Go is really specific on helping founders get their time back and build their best bodies. Like we talk about the same stuff every single day, all the time, right? So as you grow your audience, the audience that you're growing is specific, right? And so as you grow a specific audience, your options are more plentiful, right? So you can do things like create a micro offer. As you get a little bit bigger, you're testing the waters. Will your audience spend money with you? If they do, say they spend, my first product was $50. If they spend $50, can you deliver $50,000 of value and like set the stage for a deep future relationship for the next decade, right? You have that option. A few years later, you could do a core product as your audience grows and maintains specificity, right? Then if you keep growing like me, get to a million followers, 1.5 million across a few platforms, you can drop your high ticket offer like I did with the Creator MBA, because I've been on beating the same drum for so long. And then eventually could probably do something even higher ticket. The reverse of that is when you don't have a specific audience, when your audience is relatively generic, when you're talking about things like just general productivity, for example, right? Mm-hmm. Productivity in and of itself is a thing, but there are so many different types of productivity. It can get so much more niche than that. And so what happens is you might have a harder time as your audience grows, establishing that exactly what should that micro offer be when you're just systems, productivity, like what is the micro offer? How do you build that? How do you say I'm the exact right person to solve this very specific problem for you when what you've been talking about is broad, right? It becomes much more difficult. So I think those people have a longer path to monetization, but when they get to the end of that path, they might be able to have a bigger payback. So let's take someone like James Clear, for example. James Clear made some money on his way to becoming an author, but Atomic Habits was his moneymaker, right? Yeah. It took him a decade of building a massive audience around habits, which is a pretty broad topic. And then he dropped a 5 times New York Times bestseller, right? But it probably took him a really long time to get there. Whereas other people along the way might be more gradual in creating those businesses. Now, caveat to all this, there are of course outliers in both camps. Those who have been specific and never been able to build offers the way up, and those who have been broad and have built, plenty of offers on the way up. It's not a steadfast rule. It's not black and white. It is more likely to follow one of those two paths.
it does take discipline to follow the more narrow path. Because you mostly talked about solopreneurship, and I tend to like just tweet random shit. Like it's entertaining to use Twitter, right? So like,
Totally.
so I need to, maybe talk to my family more or something instead of like talking to just random online people.
Yeah, I think like in the end of the day, like there's an example in my course where I remember, I'm actually going to pull it up because it's a really good example. So just give me a split second. Because I want to read to you this thing that I went through back in the day with my company. So as myself and the CEOs were building our company, we at some point wanted to invest in SEO for the business because we had built a really big sales team. We were getting a ton of leads, but it was time for us to actually go out and like invest in proper SEO. So we went out and we interviewed a bunch of people. And this is basically what we heard, right? We interviewed one young lady and she said like, oh, I do SEO for companies. And you're like, okay. Next person was like, I help companies do better SEO. And you're like, all right, sounds about the same. I've been working in SEO for companies like yours for a decade. All like super generic. I do SEO. I help companies with SEO. I've been working in SEO for a decade. Then we had this guy come along, right? And this guy basically said something like this. We're a healthcare company. Old school SEO tactics don't work in the crowded healthcare space, especially for early stage companies without a lot of traction. Over the last 5 years, I've built a new approach for healthcare SEO that lets up and coming companies compete with the entrenched healthcare businesses at a fraction of the price. Now new companies in the space can compete more quickly and with a smaller budget. Is that worth a conversation? Like, of course, right? How much more aligned and relevant can that pitch be than I do SEO for companies like yours? And so the reason that I share this is because you can hear the relevance, you can hear the specificity, and 100% of people would choose to work with that person or bring that person in to interview for the job. And we don't think about that when we're creating our content, when we're building our brands. We're trying to be entertaining and get the most likes. It's like, no, be that guy. Be the guy who solves a very specific problem that's painful for a very specific company or person.
Yeah, it's just a matter. It's also just a matter of putting a little bit more effort into your outreach, right? It's like he actually did some research on what you guys did. You provide some value upfront.
Totally. But also when people on social media go to read your tweets and your profile, like they can't just find funny memes. They better find stuff that's aligned with what you just pitched, right?
Yes.
And that's why creating content that's specific is important.
All right, I'll try to make my memes more specific. That's what I'll try.
Nice.
Cool. I have two more questions. I notice a lot of tech people, when they try to transition to the solopreneurship path, they teach these like high ticket core courses, right? Like this live core courses that charge $1,000. But like you're like one of the few careers that actually made like these low ticket courses or like $150 or now $500 and actually kind of scaled. There's this concept of like selling stuff while you sleep. But I'm not sure if that's true or like you chose this path because it's like more scalable or, you know, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, a couple different reasons.
Yeah.
I think I chose this path first off because like cohort-based courses were not really a thing when I started. Like no one had built Maven. Like it just wasn't popular the way that it's popular now, or at least, you know, more popular. So I didn't think of it as an option, number one. Number two, when I built my first kind of little bit of my brand, I really wanted to decouple time from earnings. I had made money as a consultant for a year. I was working 40-hour weeks and 50-hour weeks of like meetings, right? Just like tons and tons of meetings. So like the idea of going on and doing these presentations, I didn't love that. So I thought to myself, like, can I automate this? Like, if I make this more affordable, is this a win for both me and the customer? And I wanted to test a hypothesis that like, I can make it cheap, I can make it valuable, and the word of mouth alone would spread a lot about what I was doing. And I proved that hypothesis to be right, at least for me. Again, that may not be right for everybody, but I didn't want to spend the time. I just wanted to decouple time from revenue.
Makes a lot of sense. All right, man. Last question. So let's go back to our tech professional profile. You know, a lot of people are saying, these pretty comfortable jobs, right? They're making like $500,000 or something. And like they have big mortgages and maybe they just send their kids to private school. And what do you have to like, do you have any closing words of advice for these folks in terms of either solopreneurship or just like your previous life as a tech executive? Do you have any?
Yeah. I do. My goal is not to convert people. I'm not interested in making solopreneurs out of people who aren't interested in doing it or don't feel comfortable with it. That's never been my intention. My intention is simply to educate them that there's an option, to show them, to lay the options at their feet and say, there are other ways to make a living. So what I would do is I would encourage them to think deeply about what gets them motivated as a person. Is it working with teams, solving big complex challenges? Like if that gets them out of bed in the morning, then awesome, stay at the company. That's great. Like be aware of how companies work, right? You should be cognizant enough to know that in most people's career at some point in time, they find themselves on the wrong end of the layoff. All you have to do is be aware of that, right? So if you're the kind of person who likes working with big teams, who likes having built-in vacation, who enjoys having health insurance, who, likes the comfortable feeling of a 9-to-5 job, whether it's comfortable or not, like we could argue that back and forth. Like if you like that feeling, have a job. At the same time, be smart enough to educate yourself about how the world is changing, how layoffs are happening, and invest a little bit of time in at least getting a megaphone every once in a while and letting people know you exist, right? Like, build out your profiles, share your knowledge, because if you do get laid off and you've built a sizable network and people know you for something, it's just so much easier to become reemployed, right? It's when people are like, I got laid off and now I want to take LinkedIn seriously, or I want to start writing on Twitter. That's the worst time. You're already under a lot of pressure, right? So like, if you've already done that before, then you're in a much better situation. If you crave freedom, if you crave autonomy, if you like making decisions on your own and executing on the decisions that you've made, if your goal was eventually to be the owner of your time and of course you have customers and things like that. But if all those things sound like what you want and you're okay with the risk of not having health insurance or having expensive health insurance, not having a steady income every single day, week, or month or quarter, right? If those things don't scare you and you like the upside more than the downside, then it might make sense to at least start dabbling in that world. Get out. The same thing as the person who's staying on the job. Get out there, make yourself known, share your knowledge, share your skills, your expertise, all the unique things that you've learned. And at some point in time, especially if you get specific, start to experiment. Can you monetize a bit? And if you can monetize a bit, then you can monetize more. And if you can monetize more, you can monetize for a long period of time. So like those are the ways that I would approach it, but there's no right answer for everyone.
It doesn't have to be like a burn the boats decision, right? You can just get yourself out there and then you can decide what you want to do eventually. Yeah.
Burning the boats is the worst decision that you can make, in my opinion. So I would encourage them not to do that.
Okay. Well, I think everyone already knows this, but where can people find you online?
They can find me at justinwelsh.me. That's JustinWelsh.me. And they can subscribe to my newsletter, The Saturday Solopreneur. I send out one tip you can read in less than 4 minutes every Saturday morning.
All right, Justin. Thanks so much, man. I learned so much from this conversation.
Cool, man. Great questions. I appreciate you having me.
All right.